The Radical. Fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. The Radical. Fundamental principles.
The Yaron Brook Show.
I never learned. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Yaron Brook Show on a day where we have a new president. Like it or not. And I know none of us like it. Well, having a new president, I like. Having this particular president, I don't know. But, in spite of all the conspiracy theories, in spite of all the claims to the contrary on this chat, on my show, that Biden would never become president and that come January 20th that Donald Trump would still be president of the United States, in spite of all of that. Biden is now the president of the United States. Donald Trump is at home in Florida. Good riddance to Donald Trump. But now we have to live with what he has left us, which is a government dominated by Democrats, a president, a Democratic president, a House, a Senate, all Democrat. That is the legacy ultimately of, one of the many negative legacies of Donald Trump. It's kind of funny, the reactions, the responses. People are truly panicked and distressed and upset and so on. And I have some sympathy to that. I'm not happy about Biden being president, but I posted on Facebook that I was doing a show on Biden is president, now what? And the first comment is, the decline of the United States begins. Well, let me give you some news, buddy. The decline of the United States began a long time ago. I don't think there's anything special about Biden in a sense of the decline of the United States. The United States would be declining for decades and decades. It's been declining for a century. So, no, this isn't the beginning of the decline of the United States. What I'm waiting for is the beginning of the rise of the United States, the reversal of the now century-long decline of the U.S. Decline probably started somewhere in the 19-teens as the progressives started to take over government, probably with Wilson, Teddy Roosevelt, and Wilson, and you can go on there to the New Deal, the Great Society, and on and on and on, the steady decline of the United States, with a few little blimps up, but generally a decline in economic growth. We grow less than we used to. A decline in freedom. We're far less free than we used to. I think a decline in culture. A decline in the sense of life of Americans. A decline in the attitude of Americans. There are some areas in which America has improved over the last 100 years. Racism being one. Sexism being another. Attitude towards sex generally. Sexual orientation, much better to be. You're much freer as a gay person today than you were 100 years ago, or for that matter, arguably as a woman or as somebody in the minority. But overall, the United States has been in decline for a long time. They go on in the chat. They're shredding the Constitution. We are living in a banana republic. Yeah, true. We are living in a banana republic, not because of Biden, but because of everything that's happened, particularly under Trump. Biden's presidency will go down as the fall of the United States. We are no different than Rome or Sodom and Gomorrah. Our decadence and immorality will catch up with us. I think that's right. Our decadence and immorality will catch up with us, but I don't think anything new has happened today in terms of our descent, in terms of America's descent. One more chapter in the slow disintegration of America. To blame this, to assume that Trump was a savior and that Biden is the devil is just absurd. Now the loss of our freedoms. Yeah, you were free before this. All those taxes you paid, that's a sign of freedom. All those controls and regulations, that's a sign of freedom. We're screwed. But that's true. We were screwed before Biden was inaugurated. Before Trump lost the election, we've been screwed for a long time. All right. Today's show, I don't know. I'm tired of politics. I'm tired of Biden already. I'm tired of Trump. I'm tired about talking about these things. But it is January 20th. Biden was sworn in as president of the United States, and we do have to comment on that. And I thought it was a good opportunity to look forward. I was going to do, what can we learn from the Trump thing? But enough Trump. Had enough. I think you've had enough. So I figure we'll talk about the future rather than the past. It ain't pretty, though. It ain't pretty. Biden has really two virtues, as I see it, coming in as president of the United States. Two things going for him in my book. One, he's not Donald Trump. That is a major virtue. And second, he's not AOC. He's not a crazy far-left politician. He is not committed to a far-left agenda, and he's not Donald Trump. Now, we know that over time, moderates, centrists, people who really stand for nothing, cannot win. They don't represent anything. They have nowhere to go. They have nothing to offer. That in the end, principles will always defeat the pragmatic. And the drift that the United States has seen towards statism over the last 100 years is a great example of that. We have had no principled defenders of freedom, no principled defenders of capitalism, no principled defenders of the founding fathers. And as a consequence, the only people with principle in American politics have been religionists and rabid leftists. And the rabid leftists have won that battle so far. And therefore, we have drifted slowly but systematically and consistently towards the left. And that is not going to be stopped by a middle-of-the-road, stand-for-nothing, 78-year-old politician who has been in politics 50 years, and for most of those 50 years has stood for nothing in particular. Moderation. Unprincipled moderation. Now, I think that this unprincipled moderation is slows our drift towards the principled left. The principled left meaning the AOC left, meaning the far left, meaning the critical race theory left, the nutty environmentalist left, all the really, really bad stuff on the left. I think that having somebody like Biden slows that down relative to the speed in which we were heading in that direction under Trump. But he cannot stop it. He cannot stop it. And indeed, he will explicitly move us in a leftist direction. We will not have socialism in 4 years. We will not be Venezuela even in 8 years. But we will continue the drift that we are being engaged in for 100 years now towards greater authoritarianism, greater government involvement in our lives, greater government attempts to dictate every aspect of our lives. That drift will continue. I think it accelerated under Trump. It brought out the worst elements of right and left. Biden is more of a return to a status quo, a breather where we return to a normal pace of deterioration rather than a sped up one. So what's Biden actually going to do? It's hard to tell. It's hard to make these kind of predictions over the course of 4 years because it's hard to tell what's going to happen. It's hard to tell how things are going to evolve. But we know one thing about Biden and the Democrats that he leads. To every problem that he faces, to every problem that we will see out there in the world, to every issue, the solution is going to be more government. The solution is going to be government, bigger government, more engaged government, more intrusive government, more government in our lives. China does not own Biden any more than China owned Trump. I actually think, here's how strong Trump was on China. 4 years ago, Hong Kong was still free. 4 years ago, our trade deficit was smaller than it is today. Not that I think trade deficits matter, but by Trump's standards. 4 years ago, China was less oppressive towards its own people than it is today. 4 years ago, Trump was less aggressive in the South China Sea than it is today. Under Trump's administration, China has built bases in the South China Sea for its Navy. It's basically taken over Hong Kong's politics. It's far more aggressive, far more confident, far more assertive, and far more repressive than it was 4 years ago. Trump and the Trump administration actually helped make China worse. Now, maybe all of that would have happened anyway, but maybe not. We'll never know. The one thing we do know without question is that Trump didn't make it better. Trump did not stand up to China on the important things like Hong Kong. He did not stand up to China on its own authoritarianism at all. The things he stood up to China, is China stealing any less intellectual property today? No, not from Americans. It did sign an agreement with Europe that actually reduces theft of intellectual property, but not with America, not with the United States. Trump was pathetic on China. He raised our taxes in terms of tariffs. And other than that, China is stronger today than it was when and more assertive and more aggressive than it was when Trump took over. So I don't think Biden's going to be worse than Trump on China. Biden did not stop the Keystone Pipeline to benefit Warren Buffett. Biden stopped the Keystone Pipeline because the Keystone Pipeline has been a cornerstone of Democratic pretend game that they care about the environment. Obama stopped the Keystone Pipeline. Democrats opposed the Keystone Pipeline when Trump approved it. In every single respect. In every single respect. In every single way, Democrats have been against Keystone from the beginning and still are. And it has nothing to do with Warren Buffett, and it has everything to do with their stupid views about oil and gas and the environment. And Keystone, I've never understood why the Republicans got so excited about Keystone or why Keystone represents such an important thing. It's not, the United States doesn't need a pipeline to bring oil in from Canada, given the fracking revolutions. It's never been that important. But it's very symbolic that Biden would do that today. He's trying to appease his environmentalist left, and it's something easy he can do because it's a executive order. What would I have done with China? I've articulated that in previous shows. I would have pulled my embassy from China. I would have cut off diplomatic relations with them. I would have, in the case of Hong Kong, I would have, sanctioned them in a dramatic and significant way. And at the same time, I would have lowered tariffs to 0 to China, because the two are too unrelated. I'm not going to tax Americans in order to penalize the Chinese. That's just upside down, stupid, mercantilist thinking. But there are multiple ways in which one can confront the Chinese without dealing with trade, which was always a bogus issue. I would have put many more aircraft carriers into the western part of the Pacific to guarantee trade routes. There are lots and lots of things that you could do with China that this administration, that Trump administration and Biden administration will not do, and don't have the balls to do, and never could have done. But I know Trump is God, and everything he did was perfect, and who am I to criticize him? I know all that. You don't have to emphasize that for me. Jeff, thank you. Thanks for the support. So, Biden is a centrist. He's as corrupt as any other politician. I think all politicians are corrupt in one way or another. All politicians sell influence. And there's no question in my mind that Trump did the same thing, and Trump will capitalize on it now that he's out. He'll capitalize on whatever he pulled off before. But I think the most characteristic feature of Biden is that he is a moderate, which means he really is he's a left of center, stands for nothing, but stands for nothing really, really, really horrible either. He will try to do his best to pass legislation and get Republican support for it. He will undo many of Trump's executive orders. By the way, how many times over the years, over the last 4 years, if I can pat myself on the back, how many times over the last 4 years did I say, the good things Trump is doing, most of the good things Trump is doing through executive order or through regulatory reform at the regulatory agency level? And I said, how long would it take to reverse those? 5 minutes? 10 minutes? Well, we already saw Biden today doing a bunch of executive orders reversing Trump's achievements. The real work that needs to be done, the real way you change a country, the real way you change the politics is by doing the hard work of legislation, by going into the legislature and actually changing the laws, which is hard to do, and Trump never made an effort to do it. Other than tax cuts, he did nothing on the legislative level. The deregulation, instead of going to Congress and demanding deregulation bills when he had a Republican Congress, House and Senate, instead of doing that, he did everything through regulatory agencies, through just signing stuff, all that can be reversed very, very quickly. The real deregulation that was done in the 1970s and 80s was through legislation. The real way to change through politics is to shut down whole departments. It's to repeal laws or to pass laws that fix or eliminate the rights-violating provisions in old laws. He didn't even repeal Obamacare. And remember, Obamacare is with us forever, Not because Obama signed an executive order. Obamacare is with us forever because he did the hard work of passing legislation that put it in stone now, and it's almost impossible to get rid of it. Trump did none of that. None of that. And as a consequence, his legacy from a changing government perspective will be zero. Zero. Most of his tax cuts will be reversed. The only thing that Biden will keep is the tariffs. The tariffs he's going to keep. Because the tariffs were always a leftist policy. The tariffs were always something the Democrats loved. That he will keep. But from a legislative perspective, Trump's presidency was a complete failure. Biden has to appease his far left. He will throw them as many bones as he can. Most of the bones will be rhetorical. You will see a lot of talk about systemic racism. You will see a lot of talk about climate change. You will see a lot of talk about income inequality. And you'll see very little action. What's he going to do about so-called systemic racism? First of all, it doesn't exist. But the way they've defined it as existing, the only way to solve it is, by white people basically committing suicide or a massive redistribution of wealth along racial lines. And that ain't happening. Even Biden's new tax plans. He wants to raise the capital gains, not the capital gains. He wants to raise the corporate tax from 21 to 28%, which is halfway to where it was before Trump lowered it. Okay, not good, but that won't end the world. He wants to raise some of the marginal income tax rates that Trump reduced, but Trump reduced very few of them, very little at the top. It's not going to be the end of the world. What he really wants to do is tinker with the tax code and give people lots of little goodies and more tax deductions and more stuff where the bias is going to be towards his preferred groups. None of that is going to be the end of the world. It's just going to be ugly, stupid, ridiculous, more of the same kind of stuff that we've been seeing over the last 50 years of tinkering with the tax code to provide more redistribution of wealth. But marginal taxes are not going to 80%. We are not going to see a wealth tax in America. We're not going to see an introduction of a VAT, a value-added tax. But he's going to talk a lot. There's going to be a lot of talk, and it's going to be disgusting, and it's going to be offensive, and it's going to be upsetting because it changes the rhetoric in society about racism in a way that's inappropriate. There's a way to talk about racism appropriately, but about this whole idea of systemic racism, and the government can solve it. And the same with the environmentalism stuff. There'll be a lot of things like the Keystone Project, not allowing drilling in Alaska, which has not been allowed until Trump's probably the best things he did were on energy, and they're all easily reversible. Almost nothing Trump did on energy is sustainable. You're going to see a lot of restrictions on oil drilling, a lot of hassles for oil companies, a lot of things like that, and a lot of play for climate change, a lot of play and rhetoric about the evils and the dangers. And that's terrible because it's going to just make that part of the national debate. It's going to do more to inculcate these ideas into our children. It's going to be more inculcate these ideas into our culture and into our businesses and into our corporations. But the federal government is not going to actively try to destroy oil and gas. They'd be wiped out if they did, and they know that. On the economy, he's going to rely on what Democrats rely on for economic growth. They'll raise taxes, as I said, it's not going to be much. But the main thing that they rely on in economic growth is government spending. This is their belief. Their belief is that you can spend your way into prosperity. That government money is what matters. It's a perversion of Keynes. So you will see big budget proposals, big spending proposals. You probably won't see any entitlement reform because nobody wants to touch that. Even though entitlement reform or entitlements are going to bankrupt this country. You'll see maybe some reforms to try to shift some of the benefits of entitlement towards, the poor and lower middle class. So there'll be some tinkering with pensions and things like that, but nothing revolutionary. Biden is not a revolutionary. He's not a socialist. He's just another leftist, statist who wants to inch away towards socialism without embracing the ultimate result. Swift asks, should I read Ayn Rand or Karl Menger? You should read Ayn Rand. There's no question. I mean, after you read Ayn Rand, you should read Karl Menger. Karl Menger really has only one book, and it's not an easy read. And then you should read von Mises. But Ayn Rand first. Ayn Rand lays the foundations for everything else. The real short-run challenge that Biden will face, and maybe the one that will shape much of his presidency, is the COVID challenge, is what to do about COVID. I know that there are many people who listen to the show who don't think COVID is a problem, who don't think COVID's a big deal. I don't agree with them. Having been to California and spending time in California and knowing people in hospitals in California, both as patients and as doctors, Southern California, at least, is being hospitals adapted because hospitals are so private and they have adapted to the problem, but it's not pretty sight in hospitals. And of course, people are suffering because they won't go to hospital for other diseases. So the whole healthcare system is struggling under, with this COVID issue. And the solution, of course, to COVID, the quick solution to COVID is vaccination. And Biden has promised 100 million vaccinations in the first 100 days. Now, it strikes me as amazing that nobody seems to do the math on these things. 100 million vaccinations in 100 days means 1 million vaccinations a day. But 1 million vaccinations a day is super slow. Super slow. 100 vaccinations a day would have the entire country vaccinated with the first dose in a year, 2 doses, 2 years. That's insane. We should have this done in 3 months. 2 doses. Which means in 100 days, we should be doing 6 million vaccinations a day. So I don't know how everybody's excited about this 100 million a day, and they're not doing the math. I mean, right now, as far as I know, the United States is doing about 1 million vaccinations a day. So, I think this idea of throwing out a big number, 100 million, impresses people. Okay, current rate of vaccination, Josh says, is 700,000 a day. Okay, so he wants to increase it by 300,000. Yippee! Israel is vaccinating 250,000 people a day, a much smaller country, which far fewer resources, and it's doing it more efficiently. It will have the entire population vaccinated within 100 days. My parents in Israel already had 2 shots. My wife's entire family has already had 2 shots. They're fully vaccinated. It's over. So, if you set really, really low goals, you tend to attain them. Maybe that's its purpose in setting it that way. But the solution to vaccination is to privatize the distribution, to privatize, to let FedEx and UPS, to let CVS and Walmart, to let doctors' clinics and hospitals. Now, it's hard to do all that without a pricing mechanism. And the government is already committed to buying all the vaccines. But certainly these companies can be paid to do a better job distributing and actually vaccinating individuals than what the federal and state governments are doing right now. It is a travesty, another black mark on the Trump presidency that have basically screwed up COVID from beginning to now. And now it's Biden's turn to probably continuing the screw up, because they're continuing to rely on government. As I said, government is the solution for a Biden administration. For every problem, there will be a government solution. And of course, we know that those kind of solutions are fleeting and not real. Not real. All right. Let's see. So, what do I expect over the next 4 years? Oh, one other issue I think that's important to mention. I think the Democratic Party in the next 4 years is going to be rife with internal conflict. You're going to see a lot of fighting among Democrats. I think they're going to be too busy, in a sense, fighting among each other to really do much to us. I think particularly the far left are going to be very disappointed. They already are. They never liked Joe Biden. They don't like, let me see if I can get her name right, Kamala Harris. I think that's close. Kamala Harris. They never liked them. And I think they're not going to like them as we move forward. They're not going to be radical enough. They're not going to be socialist enough. They're not going to be, and they're going to be upset constantly. I don't think we're going to see a lot of riots and burning in the streets, but I think you're going to see a lot of strife within the party, a lot of disagreements within. Biden is not a socialist. I mean, if Biden is a socialist, so is everybody in American politics today. And Josh Hawley is just as much a socialist as Biden is. And certainly Trump was arguably even more socialist than Biden. So they were all socialists in a sense that they're all statists. But you see, this is the problem. Let's draw a line for a second. Words have meaning. Words have meaning. And it doesn't help when we make the meaning of those words ambiguous. It actually makes communication more difficult. So people call Democrats communists. Well, some of them at the very, very far left are. But communism means something. It means the dictatorship of the proletariat. It means a dictatorship. It means subjugating all of us to the whim of a leader. It probably means the murder of hundreds of thousands, if not more people, because you need to cleanse in order to do communism properly. It means a real commitment to egalitarianism. And it has a whole theory associated with it in terms of how government, it means immediately the nationalization of all private property, all land, all productive property will be nationalized. That's what communism means. You nationalize everything. Everything. I don't think there's anybody. I mean, there's some people, but there are very, very few people affiliated with the Democratic Party who are communists in that sense. I know communists who really want to nationalize all property. Kale says Biden will increase taxes to 40%. Whose taxes? The very wealthy, how much they pay now? Anybody know how much the very wealthy pay now? I mean, very wealthy means over $250,000 if you're an individual, and I think it's $400,000 or something like that as a couple. What is the top marginal tax rate today in America? No, on a federal level, not on a state level. Federal level, purely federal level. What is it? Because 40% sounds scary. But if you realize that right now it's 37 point something, then he wants to increase by an additional 2-3%. Okay. Does that make him a communist or a socialist? No, it's more than 34. It's 37. And under Obama, what was it? Under Bush and Obama. I think under Obama it was 39. And if you include Social Security and Medicare, Medicare is 2.7%. So 37% plus 2.7, you're already at 40%. So today, the top marginal tax rate is already over 40%. Biden will not tax capital gains at 40%. I am willing to bet anything you want on the fact that Biden will not increase capital gains taxes to 40%. And the reason is simple. I mean, who are the funders of Biden? Who are the funders of the Democratic Party? It's, Wall Street, a lot of trust fund babies who live off of capital gains, Silicon Valley. I mean, they're not going to tolerate a massive tax increase. Now, Biden will torpedo his own economy, there's no question, but he'll torpedo it not by raising taxes, he'll torpedo it by spending government money with no end. But even there, I think that some Democrats will balk, and it'll be very difficult to pass that in the Senate, even to get 50 votes in the Senate for massive spending and massive tax cuts. It's not going to happen. There's not going to be that much done. The far left, there are people in the far left who want to nationalize the media. There are people in the far left that you can categorize as communists, just as there are people in the far right that you can categorize as Nazis. But they have no real influence. So they're not communists. Now, are they socialists? Well, some of them are. But even the ones who call themselves socialists, are they really socialists? Now, first, if Denmark is an example of socialism, then that's not socialism. If what they want is to turn America into Denmark, in some ways we'd be better off, in some ways worse off, but in some ways better off. So, socialism means something. Socialism is a system by which the means of production are owned by the state. There is no socialist government today, even in Europe. Never mind the Democrats in the United States. Very few Democratic senators want to literally own the means of production. Indeed, what everybody is not a socialist. What everybody is in Washington, D.C., or almost everybody, is a kind of a fascist. They all want to keep the means of production in supposedly private hands, but they want to regulate it and control it. They want the state to run it. That's what Trump wanted. That's what Obama wanted. I mean, Obamacare is that. It's, you have insurance companies, you have private doctors, you have private hospitals. But not really. They're all doing the government's bidding. They're all controlled by the government. And in that sense, all of that is fascism more than anything else. Yes, some in the Democratic Party want single-payer health care. But the UK has single-payer health care. It's terrible, by the way. But they're not socialists. I mean, even the Conservative Party in England advocates for single-payer. So let's use words accurately. And I think the better way to call all of these people is statists. Some of them we are drifting towards socialism or drifting towards fascism. And yes, I know, all of these are forms of statism, and there's a sense in which socialism is a word that captures all of them. But I think you lose the essence when you lump them all together and call them all socialism. When people hear socialism, they think owning the means of production. Nobody is advocating for that. Even Biden is not advocating for nationalizing industry in the United States. So they're all statists. And when it comes to economics, they're all fascists. That's what they are. And that's what's going to continue. And that's where we are. The next 4 years are going to be tough because I think the economy, there's no such thing really as democratic socialism. And even democratic socialism, I'll give you an example of a real democratic socialism. I think it was 1980, maybe 81. You can correct me. I don't remember the exact date. Mitterrand, you remember Mitterrand was elected president of France. And Mitterrand was a democratic socialist, a real one. So what did he do? What was the first thing that Mitterrand did as a democratic socialist? He nationalized the banks. I mean, literally, he nationalized the banks. He took the banks and made them state-run and owned. Now, that's what a democratic socialist is. He's a socialist who was elected democratically, but he still does what a socialist does, which is nationalize. Now, it turned out very badly for Mitterrand. He was going against the tide of history. This is the 1980s. Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan were overseeing economies that were booming, and France sunk like a rock. The nationalization of the banking industry was a complete and utter disaster. Complete and utter disaster. And he had to privatize the banks. And he landed up being a president that drifted towards embracing the private sector because that's the only way he could survive and that's the only way he could compete. So democratic socialism is that, socialists get elected democratically. But in most Western countries, they don't survive. They haven't survived. Sweden, Norway, Denmark are not socialist. Whether you call them social democracy or democratic socialism doesn't matter. They're not socialist. They're statists. They redistribute a lot of wealth, but they also allow for private enterprise, private property, and they regulate less than the United States. Why am I wearing this? No wonder it's super hot. Yes, Mitterrand was 1981 to 1995. Thank you. And he was always almost kicked out very early on because the nationalization of the banks went so badly. But he won re-election because he shifted and he privatized and he moved towards more market-oriented solutions. I'm not trying to convince you they're more Nazis than they're communists. Funny that I never said any of that. All I said was the far left has their communists and the far right has their Nazis. I didn't make any implication in terms of numbers. I don't know what the numbers are. I think there were a lot of wackos on the far right, even if we don't want to call them Nazis. There are all kinds of forms of fascists and unthinking fascists on the far right that I think are, significant numbers. Who are not Nazis, but there's also not that many actual communists. I actually think the real problem on the left is not communism. The real problem on the left, I've said this many, many times, is nihilism. I think most of the far leftists are nihilists. It's not that they're trying to establish a dictatorship of the proletariat. It's trying to establish chaos, destruction for the sake of chaos and destruction. They're trying to tear everything down for the sake of tearing everything down. I think we're in for bad economic times that the Biden administration will try to solve by printing more money. I would not be surprised at all if in the next 4 years We see stagflation, a stagnant economy with real inflation. And I mean here inflation by price inflation. We've already got inflation in terms of inflating the money supply. I really think that we are, as an economy, we're going to struggle to create jobs. We're going to struggle to get people, to get people to be successful in the middle class. But that's where we are today. And that's what we're heading towards. We're heading towards greater strife, greater problems, greater challenges. And, Biden claims unity is the answer, but unity is not the answer. You're not going to unite the left and the right. Angela writes, but wackos on the far left have cultural power. I know that. Why is this? Why are you saying this as if I don't understand it, or as if this is some new revelation you're going to make in my friend? I know that wackos on the left have cultural power. Wackos on the right have cultural power as well. You saw that in 78 million people voting for Trump. You saw that on January 6th. You see that everywhere. You see, wackos of the right influencing the culture, not through the cultural institutions of universities and things like that, but through other mechanisms. Culture is not just what comes down to universities, otherwise we'd all be nihilists and communists now. We're not. But the far left has far more cultural power. There's no question about that. Nobody's questioning that. I've attacked their various ideologies over and over and over again over the last 20 years as a public figure, and I will continue to do so. They're nuts. They're crazy. I mean, nuts is too generous because they're evil. Their ideology is evil. Their manifestations of evil. It's all evil stuff. That doesn't change the fact that there are evil, bad people on the right. Now, I know you want all the focus to be on the left. You're not going to get that from me. You're going to get me pointing out bad stuff wherever it happens to be, attacking policies and philosophies and ideologies that are bad wherever they happen to be on your fictitious political map of left and right. Evil is evil is evil. Bad stuff is bad stuff is bad stuff. I don't care where it comes from. It needs to be called out. All right. So Biden's presidency will be a failure. And Biden's presidency would be a failure. And the sad part of it is because of Trump, the Republicans will probably not be in a position to take advantage of that, the better Republicans. The Republican Party is likely to be too weak to take advantage of Biden's failure. And in spite of the failure, in spite of how pathetic, I mean, Biden is soft-spoken, has no charisma, has no real energy, and it's going to be interesting to see how he gets legislation passed, although he might be more sophisticated because he was actually a legislator. He was a senator for many years. So unlike Trump, he knows how this works. But it's going to be interesting to see how the next 4 years play out, because while I think Biden will be an absolute failure, and talking about unity and unity and unity, there is no unity and there's no program for unity. To have unity, you have to have shared values. What is the shared value? There's no way Mitt Romney is a candidate in 2024. Republicans will never vote for Mitt Romney. And I think he'd be quite old by then. But no, I have no idea who the candidate is. But somebody has to unite the Republican Party. Never mind Biden, who wants to unite the American people. Around what? What is it? What is the shared value that we're supposed to unite around? America? But what does America mean? Does it mean the same to these two groups? Now, it would be nice if we got rid of the vitriol. But even then, you need something, some value to work towards, something to say, okay, We're together in this venture, in this enterprise, together on these ideas, but without any shared values. What do we have? Republicans were not doing well before Trump came along, but Trump has destroyed the party. I'll give you a sense in which Republicans were doing much better before Trump came along. When Trump came along, Republicans held the Senate. When Trump came along, Republicans held the House. 4 years later, Republicans don't hold the Senate and don't hold the House. Yeah, that's a big deal. Republicans held the House. All through George Bush's years, Republicans, and I'm talking about politically, not in terms of actual policy. Republicans held the House in all but 2 years under Obama. Republicans, lost the House under Trump and didn't regain it. Yeah, I'm glad to see the lame Republican Party dead as well. And I'm glad to see the lame Trump Party lame as well. And now we'll see what, if anything, rises from the ashes. Will something better rise from the ashes? And, Republicans were pathetic, but at least they stopped Obama. For 6 years, Obama got almost nothing done because the Republicans controlled the House and then later the Senate. Right? What did Obama get done other than Obamacare, which he got through just before the Republicans took a majority in the Senate? I wish there was a little bit of even that Republican Party left to stand in the way of Joe Biden and the Democrats. But I'm not sure that even that is there. And, of course, they just lost Georgia. They just lost Georgia because of Donald Trump, because of the nuttiness of this administration. So, no, I'll take a crippled Republican Party of the Obama period over Trump's Republican Party any day. And over today's Republican Party, absolutely. Because at least they slowed things down. They slowed things down. They slowed the deterioration down. They were good is maybe too strong. They were a decent opposition party. They have lost that opportunity now. And that's tragic for us because we'll be the ones suffering from it. All right, let's do some Super Chat questions. Let's be honest. Is the GOP base uneducated white trash in small town America? How are we going to change the culture intellectually by alleging that by aligning with our foundation? I'm not aligned with that foundation, but I'm not sure that's true, right? First of all, there were a lot of people on this chat who are part of the GOP and part of Trump, and I don't think they're uneducated white trash. It's also true that historically, the GOP did very well with suburban educated people. It's only under Trump that they completely lost the suburbs. Now, I don't think we can align with anybody today. So I'm not about aligning myself with anybody. A pox on both their houses. I've said this all along. I've said this all along. Republicans are statists, Democrats are statists. I don't want to align with any of them. I want to siphon off the best. I want to siphon off from both of them the best people. And yeah, the best people are not going to be white or any other color trash. They're going to be people who care about morality, people who care about, who are proud, people who care about their own life, people who want to pursue their own happiness, people who want to make something of their life, do something. People who generally believe in progress, generally believe in technology, people who generally believe in evolution. That would be a good start. I want to siphon those people, just like I've siphoned some of you to the cause of Ayn Rand, just like I've siphoned some of you to the cause of objectivism. I want more. We don't have enough. And for that, we're going to find people among the Democratic Party and among the GOP. We're going to find people all over the place. Among libertarians, among conservatives, among liberals, among all kinds of people. I know a bunch of people who are rabid environmentalists and today are supporters of the Iran book show and committed to Ayn Rand and Objectivism. And what we need to do is not compromise, not sell out, not ally ourselves with either Democrats or Republicans, not align ourselves with Trumpists. And this was my argument to Objectivists 5 years ago. Don't align yourself with this guy. Don't ally yourself with a politician who holds no principle. You might vote for him, fine, but don't align yourself with him. So we need to find the best. And you're going to find the best by not aligning yourself with a political party and by speaking up on principle, by expressing principle, by not compromising, and by, getting the word out there. Getting the word out there. Right? Do delusional people, let me one second, does that count mixed economy just make it harder and take longer to succeed? Or are we at the point where the statist element has made it impossible for segments of our population to ever rise from poverty? I think it makes it harder. I don't think it's never, and you keep hearing stories of people who are successful and have risen up even today. Certainly, Silicon Valley is filled with people who've been successful, coming from all walks of life. But it's true even from the worst neighborhoods. Now, it's harder. So fewer people will succeed in doing it. But it's not impossible. Not yet. And it's going to become harder the more the statists get their, tentacles into the economy and control us and regulate us. But that's what needs to be fought. And a lot of it needs to be fought in the name of the ambitious poor, in the name of the ambitious common person, the people who don't know exactly and can't understand what is going on. But they want to make their lives better, and they keep hitting barriers. They keep hitting barriers created by the state that prevents them from succeeding. And there's, that is an unbelievable, travesty, tragedy. And that is the tragedy of the mixed economy, is that it makes success very, very, very difficult for ambitious poor people. How can you say authoritarianism is unsustainable when we had 1,000 years of dark ages in a world of nothing but authoritarianism, and North Korea is still around today? That's a good question. I think authoritarianism is unsustainable in a modern world because knowledge and information is so diffused. You can probably isolate a particular geographic area for decades, like North Korea. It would have to be an area that was always poor, have to be an area that never had any knowledge or information reach it. It would have to be an area that was easy to isolate, partially because it is surrounded by semi-authoritarian sea. All you have to really focus is on one border, which is the border with South Korea. And even North Korea, if we had the right policies, would not be sustainable. Would not be sustainable. The problem is, it keeps coming back to Trump. I'm sorry, but that's what it is. When you have the president of the United States go hug and kiss and pretend to be best friends with the dictator, then yeah, that sustains the regime for longer. But North Korea should be done by now. Done. Those launches of the missiles 10 years ago, not to mention the appeasement under Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan, George Bush Sr., Bill Clinton, George Bush Jr., appeasement and appeasement and appeasement. We've supplied them with food. We've supplied them with product. When we set embargoes, we let China cheat. We've let South Korea cheat. We've let the Russians cheat. So we've done nothing to actually achieve anything in terms of bringing it down. But the 1,000 years, 1,000 years, and this is the difference. And I'm going to be speaking more on this because I think it's really, really important. And a reason, in spite of all the bad stuff, to be optimistic. When Rome fell and left the world to be reigned by authoritarians for 1,000 years, when it fell, the knowledge of Rome fell with it. Yes, there were pockets in which it was sustained to some extent. Some of the knowledge remained in Byzantine, but not really. And then it was resurrected in the Arab world, but not fully. And whenever it did rise, it stayed within small communities and small areas. When Rome fell, the roads that Rome had built decayed and disappeared. And the knowledge to build tall buildings, the knowledge to build big domes, the knowledge to build water canals, to build pipes, to build faucets, which existed in Rome, all went away, all disappeared. Today, the knowledge, for example, of science and engineering, the knowledge of history, but primarily science and engineering, because I think science and engineering are important, is everywhere. It's diffused in the entire world. It would be almost impossible for us to lose that knowledge for 1,000 years. Now, you can imagine a scenario like that, where that knowledge just disappeared. You'd have to have some massive catastrophe that wiped out electricity and wiped out computers and basically took us backwards to the Stone Age to start over. But in a world in which communication is so abundant, in which knowledge is so abundant, in which it's so easy to get around firewalls, now authoritarian government could sustain it. It's sustaining itself so far in China. But totalitarian government, I don't think is sustainable. So I just don't, even if a certain part of the world falls into authoritarianism, I don't think other parts of the world will. And as long as the one part of the world that fell into authoritarianism is not able to lock itself away like in North Korea, then it'll be influenced by those other places. And it will not, I don't think it'll be sustainable. The amount of knowledge we have, the knowledge of the founding fathers, the founding documents, the knowledge of the philosophers of the Enlightenment, the knowledge of Ayn Rand, the knowledge of Newton, the knowledge of the science of the last 300-400 years, all of that makes authoritarianism, particularly totalitarianism, very difficult to sustain. And I don't think it would be sustainable. Now, I hope we don't test it out and figure it out. I'm skipping some of the unrelated questions, although some of these are kind of borderline related. Okay, here's one. For those that may have somewhat lost sight of the distinction between opposing the Democrats and supporting Trump, yes, I'm shamefully guilty of this. Do you have any specific objectivist reading suggestions from Trump detox? I mean, go back and listen to all my shows during the Trump presidency. I would go back and read Ayn Rand's writing from the 1960s and 70s. So read her essays on politics. Read her approach to politics, how she dealt with ideas. I mean, most of the time she criticized the left, but how she criticized the left, in what ways she did it, the kind of arguments she made. And then look at how she criticized, for example, JFK for his pragmatism. And then think about to what extent was Trump even more pragmatic than JFK? What would she have thought of Trump if he was more pragmatic than JFK? If she had such a low view of pragmatism when it came to JFK, what would her view of pragmatism be when it came to Trump, who was much more of a pragmatist? Read Ayn Rand's political analysis from the 60s, and you can find that in collections in The Voice of Reason, in Philosophy Who Needs It, and then in those big newsletters, the Objectivist, the Ayn Rand letter, that you can still buy, right? So, I mean, yeah, think about the fact, read what Ayn Rand had to say about why she wasn't voting for Ronald Reagan. The Fascist New Frontier, that's a good one, where she talks about why it's fascism. It's not really socialism, communism that we're heading towards. It's fascism. But you know, read why she didn't vote for Reagan. Why she kind of liked Ford, even though Ford was it was like a Republican Biden. Ford was a Republican Biden, I think. He was a middle of the road. He wasn't particularly conservative. He was a compromiser, but a decent man who spent his life in politics, who was governing from the middle, and was generally, you know, anti-government involvement, and he was not a religious, he wasn't super religious, and that's what she liked about him vis-a-vis Republican. So read Ayn Rand. That's the best detox I can think of in terms of detoxing from Trump. All right, off topic, and then I'll get back to the $20 questions, and then we have a lot of under $20 questions, which I'll do. Off topic, but an interesting moral question. 2 years after purchasing a new home, I discovered $5,000 cash in the ceiling. Do I have a moral obligation to return it to the seller? Given that they didn't mention it for 2 years, I think this is a finders keeper scenario. Well, I mean, they might have forgotten that they had it there. The question is, how do you feel about money that you didn't earn and that might actually belong to somebody else, even if they've forgotten about it? Now, so part of it would be, do you know the people who sold the house? How long did they live there? Could it be from even an older, resident? Could they be confused, and could they have forgotten? Is that even a possibility, or don't you know? I mean, my tendency would be to approach them with something like, "Did you forget something?" You know, to see if it resonates. Don't tell them it's $5,000 with cash, because then, you know, that's a temptation for them to become immoral in the sense of taking it. But I think you've got to give them an opportunity to say, maybe, yeah. Or did you guys leave anything in the ceiling? And if so, what did you leave in the ceiling? Let them identify the thing that you found to make sure that they're not scamming you. And if it's theirs, it's theirs. It's not yours. How to detox from CNN and New York Times. Same thing. Read Ayn Rand. All of you, particularly WPR, you should read Ayn Rand because you're clueless. And Ayn Rand could really educate you. So a lot of people need to detox from politics. I mean, a lot of you need to detox from politics. You place way too important a place on politics in your life. You're way too obsessive, way too focused, way too, spending way too much time reading and thinking and arguing and getting angry and getting upset about politics. Yes, I know the show today is a politics we're going to have fewer shows on politics moving forward. We'll let Biden catch some steam before we go back to the Biden derangement syndrome. I'd like to do fewer topics. This is the difference, right? If I had done something on art today, we'd have, 100 live viewers. And, we peaked, I think, at something like 260, 270 people watching at any point in time live. We'll probably have 1,000 views on this video by midnight my time, right? By 11 o'clock Eastern time. If I'd done something on art, if I'd done something on ethics, if I'd done something on living a better life, if I'd done something on any of those topics. So you guys are incentivizing me. You guys are giving me a signal that what you want me to talk about is politics, because that's what you watch, and that's when you contribute the most money. That's the other aspect of it. I get much more super chat dollars when we talk about politics than when we don't. So I don't enjoy doing so many shows on politics, and I try not to think about politics all the time. The only time I really think about politics is I think about politics in the context of what am I going to talk about today. Book and movie reviews, if I did that, we'd have 150 fewer people watching live. So it's a challenge, and this is the challenge the media faces, of appeasing your audience or doing what you love. Or talking about what you love. All right, yes, Wanda Freeman makes a good point. We've got 150 likes, 250 live watches. Before you leave, and I know some of you are leaving now, it's already an hour something into the show, please like the show. Please just click on the like button. It helps the algorithms. It's really good for the show. Just let's get that up to over 200. It should be easily over 200. So please, before you leave, get the like button up. Don't forget to share. Those of you who want to support the show, please use the Super Chat feature to do that if you want to do it live right now. Otherwise, the best way to support the show is through monthly support. You can do that on youronbookshow.com/support. You can do it on Patreon. You can do it in Subscribestar and on Locals. I'm still looking for about $2,000 a month additional support to get to the kind of numbers I need. We keep taking 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and we need to get another about $2,000. So anybody who can help by either raising their current contribution or by either increasing their contribution or by adding their contribution, that would be fantastic. And of course, Super Chat is great. All right, let's do Adam's question because he put a lot of money onto it. The Fed has increased wealth disparity. I think that's true. Yellen will redistribute it. Seems like there is no stopping the train wreck and focus on principled and capitalist alternative that propel can turn to when the system inevitably collapses. Yeah, but we need to set the ground, right? We need to prepare the groundwork for when it all collapses. If you only start doing it then you're not going to have any traction. You need to provide people with an alternative. You need to explain it. You need to tell them that, this is that you need to tell them that what we have today is going to collapse. We need to constantly be educating and educating and educating and educating. Yellen is going to try to redistribute it. As I mentioned earlier, she's not going to be able to do much redistribution. She's going to be very careful not to collapse the economy. She's going to be focused on fiscal stimulus, but she can't do too much fiscal stimulus because the deficits are so large. There's a cap on how big the deficits are going to be. The Biden administration's hands are going to be tied if inflation picks up. I don't think we're going to just collapse. I think we're going to go into a slow grind. And that'll give us time to educate. That's what we need to do. That's the focus that needs to happen. That's what we need to talk about all the time, is to change people's ideas about the world. Somebody says, have you considered getting on Steven Crowder? I mean, of course I've considered getting on Steven Crowder. I'd love to get on all these podcast shows and everything, but he had me on once behind his firewall. He's never had me back, and I can't get on these shows just by willing it. They have to want me on the shows, and so far, you know, I got on Ben Shapiro, I got on Dave Rubin, I got on Lex, but I have not been able to get on Joe Rogan or Crowder. Okay, do delusional people rely on part reality and part projection, and when they're clinically insane, you lose the reality part? Yeah, yes, absolutely. So nobody can actually survive if they're completely delusional and all they do is project and have no connection to reality. So everybody to survive day to day, they have to have some connection to reality, and that's what keeps them going. In a sense, what it means to go insane, when you can't take care of yourself, when you can't cope, when you can't handle anything in reality, is when it's all gone, when reality, any connection to reality is gone. And now you're dependent on other people to bring reality to you and to help you. All right, how do you identify when you're focusing on non-essentials? How do you identify when you're focusing on non-essentials? Good question. I think it's through introspection and through trying to lay out what the problem is and what you think the essentials are. So if you find yourself scattered and having difficulty integrating things, and you're probably focused on non-essentials. So the approach should be step back and ask yourself a question. What is the problem? Let me define it clearly. Are the essentials? Let me make a list of the essentials. And then every one of those question, if I took this away, would anything change? And if the answer is no, nothing else would change, well, it's not an essential. An essential is something that everything else depends on. That the whole explanation would collapse. So you have to kind of backtrack. You have to focus on what it is you're trying to do. So, I don't know. You want to know what was essential about Trump? There's a lot of non-essentials about Trump, like the fact that he deregulated. The good stuff is non-essential. Well, the first question is, okay, I'm trying to evaluate Trump. Then make a list of all your different evaluations. And then, see which ones have explanatory power about what he's doing and what's happening in the world, and success versus failure, and what are the outcomes. Stephanie says Biden has already done some damage. It's only day one. Trump did damage on day one too. I mean, stop it. Stop it. Of course he's doing damage. Every president does a lot of damage. But the idea that he's unique in that he's doing damage on day one is ridiculous. And the world will not end. The world is not going to end. Stop focusing. Stop focusing on politics, obsessing about it. Take 25% of the time you spend on politics and fearing what Biden will do, and spend it on thinking how to make your life better, how to enjoy yourself more, how to get more pleasure out of life. Just a quarter. There's going to be a lot of damage done by Biden. I've said that all along. He's a terrible president. He's going to be a terrible president. There's a lot of damage done by Obama, a lot of damage done by Trump, a lot of damage done by Bush, huge amount of damage done by Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton. Well, I'm glad, Stephanie, that that the only time you spend on politics is with me. That's good. Well, but you seemed worried, and what I'm trying to say is don't get too worried, because things are going to get worse. But they were going to get worse anyway. If Trump had won the election, he would have done damage on day one. It's just going to be bad. And just accept that and live your life. They're going to screw with us. Accept it. Live your life. And let's build something positive. Let's build a community here of positive values, of good things, a focus on rebuilding society when the time comes, on replacing these idiots when the time comes. What do you think about the chance of sort of debt jubilee and large write-downs to keep the economy humming along? I mean, there'll be an attempt to do that. There'll be an attempt to write off student loans. But there's also objections even within the Democratic Party to doing that. White students, most of those students are middle class, or some of them are even upper class that have the loans, right? So it's going to be very difficult to do debt jubilee, but at some point the United States is going to have to do it for government debt because it won't be able to pay it all back. There's just no way to pay it all back unless you're willing to crazily inflate the economy. Okay, let's start at the top. These are all the under $20 questions. Kudos to Amy Peikoff for identifying censorship by proxy concept versus big tech. Why is it that the women in objectivism seem to be the only ones with any balls? All right. I mean, I guess that was that was intended as an insult towards me, so I'll just skip that. I commented on censorship by proxy before. To the extent that it exists, the censorship is still only done by government. And therefore, all your ire, all your hatred, all your they should stop doing this should be focused on government and not on the poor companies that have to suffer from the threats of government, which I assume is what proxy censorship by proxy. And to blame tech for the censorship by proxy means you don't have any balls to go to the source. And the source is government. The source is government intervention in the economy. The source is government control. All right, maybe I misunderstood the question. Sorry if I did. But I'm all with Amy going out there and standing up to people. I'm not sure which question I misunderstood, but I don't know how to interpret why is it that women and objectivists seem to be the only ones with any balls other than an attempt to insult me. Why do so many objectivists seem to think the battle is to be fought in electoral politics? I don't know. I don't know. That's not where the battle is to be fought. The only thing electoral politics is good for is buying time. Buying time. Today saw calls for objectivists to influence Republicans post-Trump with a culture that hates capitalism, egoism, and reason. I agree with you. Ultimately, our only chance is to change the culture. And if we change the culture, guess what will happen? Guess what will happen? Politics will fix itself. So, I am a strong advocate for focusing on egoism and capitalism, and of course, reason, as the way to change the culture. And by the way, one of the ways in which you help change a culture, one of the ways in which you teach people about reason, about egoism, is by commenting on politics, because hopefully what you illustrate when you comment on politics is the application of reason, is the principle of capitalism and egoism and what they would require in a political system. So it doesn't mean you don't deal with politics, but you don't deal with politics with the delusion that you're going to affect politics. What you're trying to affect, what at least I'm trying to affect, is the culture that we live in, trying to move it in a direction so that politics will take care of itself, because it will if we get the culture right. Hey, Yaron, have you seen the BBC series North and South? No, I haven't. Or read the story by Elizabeth Gaskell? No, I haven't. It depicts a moral businessman well. Would love your thoughts. Is this a new series? I'm curious if you're seeing it now. Is it an old series? But yeah, I'm looking for new stuff to watch. So North, writing it down, North and South on BBC. All right, well, I'll look for it. So if you can on the chat, just mention if it's new or old. Okay, another $20 question. Libertarians and objectivists don't seem to go far in my view from being mostly individually minded. Wouldn't it be smart move to have an alliance, or maybe, in your view, an unholy alliance? Different note, do you like Steely Dan? I mean, Steely Dan's okay. It was not my favorite band when I was listening to them in the, when was it, the 80s? But they're okay. In terms of, I mean, an alliance for what? So I'm happy to do an alliance for them if it's an opportunity to educate people. So I have no problem going to libertarian conferences and speaking when the audiences are students, because I think I can have an impact there. I'm happy to go. I'm happy to do alliances if there's a particular specific goal. We're not going to do politics because, as we said, politics is not where the action is. It's not where you change the culture. It's you want to change the culture. But, I speak for libertarian student groups. I go to libertarian conferences and speak. Not all of them. Some of them I find abhorrent and won't go and deal with, but many of them are fine, and we participate. So I think we do have alliances on specific issues that require specific dealings. Now, I don't have an alliance on politics, on anything else for that matter, with anarchists, because they're my enemy. Anarchy is a political system equivalent to, the horrors of communism and fascism, because it's violence. Anarchy is violence. If you want to ask a question, use the Super Chat feature. Otherwise, and you can even put $2 down and I'll answer it. But if I start answering all your questions in the chat, then I'll be bogged down, and plus I'll be cheating out the people who actually put money on it. Okay. Refineries in Texas and Canadian heavy oil for jet fuel. Refineries in Texas need Canadian heavy oil for jet fuel. They used to get it from Mexico and Venezuela without Keystone. Now must use costlier rail. Yeah, and the funny thing about rail is it's more dangerous. It's more risky to communities the rail goes through. I'm all for the Keystone project. I just don't think that is one way or the other the end of the world, because the fact is we don't have a Keystone project right now, and the Keystone oil pipeline doesn't exist, and we're doing okay. Now, that might become worse, and jet fuel might become more expensive, and that's sad, because at the end of the day, we want the most efficient, productive industry possible. But it's, again, Biden is going to do the low-hanging fruit, the stuff that surely does damage, but doesn't do massive damage, but appeases some of his left-wing critics. And that's the strategy, I think. The best things that Dems can hope for is to have a quiet 4 years with maybe one notable bill passing. Well, I think he'll get more than one bill passing. If Biden can just not totally flub, then he will have paved the way for a likely Dem win after 4 years. I mean, I think it's very likely that Dems wins after 4 years, almost no matter what he does, because of the dramatic split in the Republican Party, the extent to which that split is deep now. So we'll see. How would you define abstractions, and why can't people think in them today but could in the 19th century? Well, abstractions are, I haven't got a definition of abstraction in mind, but it's a concept that is removed from concrete reality. It's an integration of more concrete concepts. So, for example, furniture is an abstraction, right? Because there is no such thing as furniture. The chairs and the tables and what's common about them is, and that's a simple abstraction. It's a low-level abstraction. And then, of course, reason is a massive abstraction. Freedom is a massive abstraction. Why were people more racist in the 19th century than today if reason and the Enlightenment was stronger back then? Two things. Why could they think in abstraction in the 19th century but not today? Well, I think people compartmentalize. They clearly can think in abstractions when it comes to things like business problems, specific types of issues that have. So they can think in lower level abstractions. It's high level abstractions that they have a really hard time thinking in. And I think the reason is the educational system. I think the education was much better in the 19th century. Expectations of people in terms of their ability to think and, the ability to think, that was expected in the 19th century. I don't think we expected of people quite the same way today. But I think it's primarily the educational system and the fact that they were surrounded by artwork and by other thinkers, and they got a better science education. All of that contributed to a better ability to think, which is prevalent in the 19th century and most of the 20th century. And as time goes on and our educational system gets worse and our intellectuals get worse, and therefore they detach abstractions from the real world. I mean, think about it this way. Abstractions are connected to the real world. They're abstractions of real things. You should be able to take any abstraction from liberty, all the way down to real things, real concretes in the real world. But when philosophers, in actually the early part of the 19th century, separated abstractions from the real world, which is what Kant does, and philosophers following Kant continue to do, then people lose interest in abstractions. The abstractions become less relevant in their life. They're not connected to anything for them. The way, we don't have, people don't define their terms. They don't explain. They don't articulate. They don't show. And what we get is a deterioration in people's ability to think. But it's always the fault of the intellectuals, the teachers, the educators. They're responsible for it. Why were they more racist in the 19th century than today if reason and the Enlightenment was stronger back then? Well, I don't know that everybody was more racist back then. Certainly parts of the world where the Enlightenment did not figure strongly, the South in the United States, was extraordinarily racist. The South in the United States was very influenced, not by the Enlightenment, but by German philosophy. You can read about this in Brad Thompson's new book. He has a whole chapter about the influence of German philosophy on the South and on Southern thinking. The North, which was significantly less racist, France, which was significantly less racist, even Great Britain, which banned the slave trade way before anybody else and significantly less racist, those places were more capitalist, more Enlightenment influenced. But there was still a lot of confusion, a lot of lack of knowledge. Why do people look differently? What constitutes genetics versus other aspect? There was a very Eurocentric, very little knowledge of other people and the rest of the world and everything else. Right? And when the Europeans encountered the rest of the world, what did they find? Well, they found barbarity. They found primitives. And they extrapolated from that they were inferior. They didn't have an appreciation for what they had. They didn't have an appreciation for the roles of ideas in history. They didn't have an appreciation for the role of freedom in history. They didn't have an appreciation for what they had. So they took the position of the people that they found in these different parts of the world as a metaphysically given without appreciating that they were in the same condition once and the only thing that brought them out of it were better ideas. So, in spite of Enlightenment ideas, they didn't get everything right. And indeed, there's a significant deterioration in Enlightenment thinking, even in the 19th century, and certainly through the 20th century. But I think with racism, they didn't fully consider the full implication of what Enlightenment ideas had, and they also didn't have a complete theory, a complete philosophy of Enlightenment. That, to really have a philosophy of individualism, of reason, you don't get that until you get Ayn Rand. You said you would always call out the Republicans on spending. If it's totally out of control, then what is it to you? What is it you don't want them to spend on? Well, everything. Show me any. I want them to shut down the Department of Education and not spend any money there. I want them to shut down the Department of Commerce and not spend any money there. I want them to shut down the Department of Health and Human Services. I want them to shut down. I want them to phase out, put a plan together to phase out Medicare and Social Security. I want them to reduce all business subsidies. Reduce. What am I talking about? I want them to eliminate to zero immediately all business subsidies. I want them to start spending less money on all the regulatory agencies instead of creating new ones. I want them to stop building walls. I want them to reduce the number of people in all the Homeland Security agencies. Right? I want them to shrink the Defense Department to make it more efficient, more lethal, more brutal, more effective at winning at wars, which is not an issue of money. It's an issue of strategy and the willingness to use the weapons that you have. I can't think of a line item in the budget today that I would not want to cut or eliminate completely now, today. And just as an illustration that this is possible, I can't remember when it was, but when Rand Paul was first elected to the Senate, in his first or second year, he proposed, this is under Bush, he proposed a budget that would cut $500 billion, $500 billion, at a time when the budget was something like $2 trillion or less. So 25% of the budget. In the next year, not over 5 years, not over 10 years, in the next year, he offered this. It got 3 votes or 4 votes, something like that, in the days where you today would get 0 votes. I don't think even Rand Paul would offer it. But in those days, he voted for it. I think Lee from Utah voted for it. Ted Cruz voted for it. So they got 3 votes. But Ted Cruz wouldn't vote for it today, and neither would Rand Paul. I'm not sure about Lee. So, man, everything. Looking back to 2016 and your expectations for Trump, is anything most surprised you about his presidency? Yes. The thing that surprised me more than anything are the Trumpists, are the dedicated, completely 100% committed people who follow Trump. Some who used to be objectivists, some who are just conservatives. Just the blind dedication to him, the obsession with him, the personality worship. I didn't see that coming. But that was the thing that most surprised me. I'm still shocked by it. Every day I see it, whoa. The amount of rationalization, the number of excuses people make for him. He was a failed president in everything that he did. Almost everything he did. A few things that he did were good. And yet people still rationalize him as a great president. He was better than this. He was better than that. But that's not it. It's the thing that really surprises me is the absolute commitment, love, dedication that people have for him. What I witnessed over the last 5 years is the rise of an authoritarian mentality among Americans. Americans who are willing and waiting for an authoritarian. Trump wasn't it, but they're ready to jump whenever he shows up and has a little, maybe more charisma than Trump did. Do parents who hit their kids have low self-esteem? Yeah, I mean, they have anger issues. They have control. They have anger issues. They have a variety of different issues. Most of those issues, most psychological issues that people have that cause them to do things like that are caused by low self-esteem. But in any particular case, it might be different things. And it also means, how do they hit them? They slap them once in a while, or do they really beat them? I mean, my dad had anger issues. He never, he hit me a couple of times with a belt. I think in those days, he thought that was the way you discipline. He felt so bad about it that he never hit any of my siblings. But I got whipped with a belt, 2, 3, 4 times when I was a kid. And I think he was angry, and I think he thought it was the right thing to do, in a sense of that's what he believed discipline meant. Did you notice that almost all the places that were worst impacted by riots were states that lacked castle doctrine and stand your ground laws? No, I didn't. But I've also seen some stats that say that places that have stand your ground laws have seen an increase in shootings, where often the person standing their ground is the one getting shot. So, I don't know. Also, correlation is not causation. There are probably many reasons why the riots happened the way they happened. They have to do with mayors who didn't stand up, mayors who are far leftist, like in Portland and Seattle, just incompetent local government that is just beholden to the radicals, like in Chicago. Atlanta, I think Georgia has stand your ground laws, and yet there were riots in Atlanta. So I don't even know if that's true. Like, Georgia would be an exception. Are you stuck in the past? Doesn't context matter? How do you know Ayn Rand wouldn't have supported Trump because of what is at stake? What is at stake? Look, I don't know what Ayn Rand would have done. Certainly not with certainty. As I said, Ayn Rand didn't vote for Reagan. She opposed Reagan. She despised Reagan. Reagan is like 1,000 times better than Trump, in my view. But I don't know at the end of the day what Ayn Rand would have done. I'm not a medium who can talk to her on the other side. I'm not a mind reader, and Ayn Rand was a genius, and I'm not. So I'm completely open to the idea that I don't know what Ayn Rand would have done with certainty. Neither do you. Neither does anybody else. All I can do is tell you, based on my own knowledge of objectivism, my own reading of Ayn Rand, my own knowledge of Ayn Rand, my own studying of objectivism for, 40 years, what I think her position on Trump would have been. And I can tell you what my position on Trump is. And you can judge it. And you can agree with me or you can disagree with me. And that's you can. I think Trump showed all indications of being a villain out of an Ayn Rand novel. He was a standard villain in an Ayn Rand novel. So even if Ayn Rand would have voted for Trump, and maybe she would have, I don't know, and I know people, obviously, objectivists who voted for her, she would have never liked Donald Trump because he was a villain from her novels in every character feature of his. So she would have maybe held her nose and voted for him. Maybe. I doubt it, given that she didn't vote for Reagan. Remember, 1980 much more was at stake than right now. The Soviet Union was deemed to be at the height of its powers. Iran had just had a revolution and was holding American hostages in the American embassy, an act of war. Jimmy Carter, who had been president for 4 years, was one of the weakest presidents in American history, was pathetic, a nothing, a zero. The economy was in a deep recession, was heading towards a deep recession, had stagflation. Inflation was over 10%. Unemployment was relatively high. Things were horrible in November of 1980 when Ronald Reagan and Jimmy Carter ran for election. And Jimmy Carter had been a nothing, a zero, and he had just completely folded to the Iranians. The Iranians. And Ayn Rand was hugely, huge opponent of Jimmy Carter's. And yet she refused to vote for Reagan because she could see the future. To think that today she would think things were so much worse that she would have to vote for somebody 100 times worse than Reagan, Trump. Carter had given up Taiwan. That's right. Thank you, Ruth. Carter had given up Taiwan. Carter had done. I mean, he'd done some good things, and I'm not talking about the good things. But he was just pathetic. And this is after Nixon and everything that he had done, and this is after the New Left and the rise of the New Left and the dominance of the New Left in our universities. And she could see where that was leading to the universities of today. And she still didn't vote for Ronald Reagan. Now, I know you guys are too young to remember all that, to know the history. And many of you have not studied Ayn Rand that closely and that deeply. But I have. And I was there. I was there in 1979, 1980. I remember 1980. I know what life was like. You don't have to believe me, but you have to give some credence to my view. And I'm admitting, I don't know with certainty what Ayn Rand would have done. How long do you think the Capitol will remain militarized? Do you think the president sees the anarchists on the left as equal threat as the right? No, I mean, he clearly sees the threat from the right as greater, as bigger. He clearly has, whether he has sympathy, I don't think he has sympathy, but he knows in order to sustain his base, he has to be tolerant of the far left, of the anarchists on the left. Although I happen to think, we'll see what happens, that Biden will be tougher with violence on the left than Trump was. So we'll see. We'll see how that plays out. But I think Biden would be a lot less tolerant than Trump on violence on the left as president. Now it's his responsibility. And it's his people, supposedly. And it's his future. Right? If you want to ask questions, use the super chat. For valuable material and improving your life, got my first bonus this week after 8 months of work. Congratulations. Based off of living objectivist ethics. Alejandra, can you slow down the asking for money? It gets tiresome. That was in his comment. You know, it's... oh, wait. There was no question there. We can educate, but the universities and media dominate what we say. It is hard to imagine we can win the battle. 50% of Americans don't agree with the left, in spite of the universities. You know, yes, it's going to be hard, but there are people, objectivists, rational people, working on improving our educational system. There are private schools being built all over this country with a more rational curriculum. There are people working on better curriculum in science and in math to bring into the schools. YouTube has become an important force in education, and particularly in cultural influence. You don't have to go to a university to take a course. You can take a course on YouTube. Technology provides us access to millions and millions of people almost instantaneously at a cost of zero. It's way too early to give up. Way too early to give up. There's tons we can still do. Rand said, never think of pain longer than is necessary to fight it. How does one shut out all the negative things around us to implement that? Focus on the good. Focus on the good things happening in your life. Focus on the good things happening in the world. There are amazing things happening in the world. I will be starting a new podcast sometime in February, I hope, or maybe in March, focused on technology, innovation, progress, economic growth. There are amazing things happening out there that are going to make your life better in amazing ways. I mean, artificial intelligence, what they call artificial intelligence, being a big one. And it's going to make life better. So focus on them. Think about them. Spend time and energy on them instead of bitching and moaning about stuff you can't change. You can't change, not in the short run. Follow up something I noticed a few times. Why do you lump anarchists and libertarians together? You may not, but you usually don't just talk about one. Well, because most anarchists I know are libertarians. And they're the ones who always want to engage because they're the ones who try to convince us that they're really objectivists, and consistent objectivists would be anarchists, which is complete nonsense. So it's the anarchists I know. I don't know the anarchists of the left. And even many anarchists of the left claim to be libertarians. It's called leftist libertarians. And the other aspect of it is anarchists dominate the libertarian movement, particularly among intellectuals. Could you compare Biden to Wesley Mouch? Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of similarities. They don't stand for anything. They're about power. I think Wesley Mouch is worse than Biden and has had a more wormy-like career. But yeah, there's a lot of similarities between Wesley Mouch and many politicians who stand for nothing. Larry Fink is going to use his $7 trillion of assets under management to enforce diversity, racial quotas in boardrooms. How evil is this on a scale of from 1 to 7 trillion from 7 trillion to infinity? It's super evil, and it's stupid. It doesn't make a difference one way or the other. It's just going to cause more resentment against quotas and against racial equality out there. It's going to backfire. But boards will go out and hire a token, whatever, and keep going. You can always expand the number of board seats. You can always do it in ways that don't materially impact what happens. It's going to be, but this is the kind of investing, investing that is focused not on maximizing shareholder wealth. I've talked about this a lot, which is going to do more harm to corporations in some respects than anything the government can do. For another viewer, for a very thorough explanation of abstraction and objectivism, see Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology, chapters 2 through 5 in the Philosophy of Ayn Rand. Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I should have done that myself. Yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert on epistemology, and certainly not off the cuff. I would have to prepare. If you want to understand abstractions, go read OPA, Objectivism of the Philosophy of Ayn Rand, chapters 2 through 5 on the epistemology, and have a much more detailed and much more true explanation of abstraction. And, of course, read Ayn Rand, Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology. But both of those should be your sources for questions on epistemology. Not my strength in terms of defining and explaining, and it's not what I think about, not what I've studied carefully. Yeah, don't read Karl Popper and David Deutsch on epistemology. Read Ayn Rand on epistemology. Read Leonard Peikoff on epistemology. Have you seen Master and Commander with Russell Crowe? If so, thoughts? I saw it the other night and found it a lot to like about it. Yeah, I enjoyed it a lot. I remember seeing that years ago. It was very good. I wish I remembered more and had more to say about it, but it was a very enjoyable movie with an admirable character, if I remember right. Have you seen Black Sails? Thoughts? I couldn't get through the first season. I couldn't really care about any of the characters. They didn't interest me. Sorry, I just couldn't get through it. In the short term, Nikki Haley seems as the only alternative out there for a response to Democrats in 4 years. She needs a more principled approach to capitalist ideas. Will you reach out to her for some consulting? Yeah, at some point I probably will if I have a way to get to her. She won't take it. There's no way she'd be interested in my ideas. And I'm not sure I would help her win. But yeah, I no harm in trying, and you never know. But yeah, at some point, if I find a path to her, I will do that. People in the Republican Party, people in a variety of different places in the Republican Party, know who I am, and they know Ayn Rand, and they know what we have to say, and they know the value we have, and hopefully they will come to us at some point. Isn't Biden telling the new caravan of people now is not the time? Sounds hypocritical to me. No, it's not hypocritical. Obama was one of the toughest presidents ever on immigrants. He deported more illegal immigrants than any president, maybe more than Donald Trump. I don't know. No president wants just a caravan of people just showing up and coming into the country. No president, without a legal framework. No president wants that. No president would tolerate that. No president would stand. I mean, the idea that Donald Trump was, Donald Trump talked a lot about immigration, demonized immigrants in ways that were horrible. But in terms of what he actually did, some of the things that he did, separating families, locking people up, all of that was horrible and maybe unique to Trump. But, no president, Democrats don't want mass immigration. Bernie Sanders has said as much. He's a union guy, and he knows that immigrants will lower wages for his union kind of jobs. In the short run, they might lower wages. They'll increase the supply. So, now, the economics of that are trickier, right? But that's what they think. They think that immigrants lower wages. What Trump was particularly nasty about was legal immigration. But Biden is not going to be, open up the borders, let anybody come in. That is a myth that Democrats are for open borders. I'd be much more sympathetic to the Democrats if they were, but they're not. They're anti-immigration. When Bush tried to do comprehensive immigration reform, some Republicans objected and many, many Democrats objected. Do I think Biden is going to deport more illegals than Trump? Probably not. Post-Trump, I think deporting illegals is gonna stall. I think Biden will probably try to legalize the illegal immigrants, which I think is the right approach. I think he'll give them some kind of amnesty. But he can't without Congress's help. And it's not clear that he has enough votes in Congress to pass immigration reform. Immigration reform will have to get 60 votes. And he doesn't have 60 votes. I'm not sure he has 50 for immigration reform. So we'll probably be stuck with the status quo. The good, for those of you who hate illegal immigrants, the good news is there are not that many of them. There are no more illegal immigrants in the United States today than there were in 2007. In 2007, there were just as many illegals. So we've had 13 years with a net of zero increase in illegal immigration in the United States. Yuan, can you please consider speaking more about finance from a practical point of view as well, either on here or on your upcoming podcast? I'll do it on here. The upcoming podcast is going to be much more narrowly focused. Any thoughts on Trump's pardon list? You know, a mishmash of all kinds of things. I found it interesting that he pardoned Bannon. Bannon is a real nasty character, a really bad guy, and philosophically unbelievably corrupt and a very bad influence in America. And he was pardoned even though he was stealing money from Trump supporters. So that's kind of interesting. I don't know. I haven't seen the whole pardon list, but it looked like a whole mishmash of characters. A lot of people he pardoned or let out of jail, I guess. I forget the term for that. Who had victimless crimes, and that's all good. That's all good. The new podcast, I'm not quite ready to talk about it yet, but it will be interviews. It'll be all interviews, and it'll be focused on innovation, technology, economic growth, progress more broadly. So think kind of The Rational Optimist, Matt Ridley's book. Think of I interviewed Norberg on his book Open. So interviews with intellectuals who are doing work about progress and success and innovation, but also interviews with entrepreneurs. I'd love to get, for that podcast, I'd love to get people like Elon Musk, Peter Thiel. I'd love to get, somebody from Apple, from Microsoft. I'd love to get some of the leading venture capitalists in the world for that podcast. So a lot of people I'd love to get. I'm not sure I can get them, but that's the kind of thing. I also showing the evil of government regulation, so the things that stop innovation. So I'd like to get somebody from Microsoft who experienced the antitrust lawsuit and what it did to Microsoft and how it impacted Microsoft from inside. But a lot of I want to talk to venture capitalists. I want to talk to people who think about the kind of things that think about the kind of people who think. I'm not so much about science because I'm not interested in the science. I'm interested in the technology. I'm interested in the innovation. I'm interested in the building of businesses. I'm interested in how I think the 21st century is different. And I've talked about this, I've hinted and talked about this quite a bit. And my partner has a theory of how it's different, my business partner. And he's going to be a big part of this, and somebody else you'll know is going to be part of it. But part of it is going to be about what is it that makes this 21st century different. And I think technology has reached a certain tipping point that makes it different. And the big tipping point is the internet and what the internet makes possible. That is the sharing of knowledge and the ability to communicate. I've said this before, but it's like the very fact that you now have 8 billion minds working on problems. So you have 8 billion people who are connected to the internet. 8 billion people connected. This goes to the point I made earlier about knowledge and how knowledge in the world we live in today cannot be lost or would be very hard to be lost. Daniel asked, would your podcast be live or would you consider announcing the guests you'll be interviewing on the show before you interview them so Super Chats can have a chance to suggest questions to ask the guests? The interviews will not be live. This will not be like this show. I will not be interacting. This will be I'll be doing interviews and putting them up. No Q&As, no. Now, I might announce them in advance, but my early interviews will all be taped in advance. And I'll just have those. At that point, if you want to support what I'm doing, you'll have to support it through kind of monthly, through kind of Patreon or something like that. And it'll be a separate account because this is not my project. This is a business project. And I'm doing it with my business partners, and it's going to be like a separate thing. It's not going to be part of the Yaron Brooks Show. It won't be on the Yaron Brooks channel. It'll have its own channel. It'll have a new identity. It'll be completely separate, and it'll be important for me to separate the two out. It will not be a show about objectivism. I don't think anything on the show will contradict objectivism, purposefully at least. but it won't be a show about objectivism. But it will be a show consistent with changing the culture. My goal with the program is to change people's attitudes towards progress, to change people's attitudes towards innovation and technology. And people, I mean people out there, everybody, not, the audience is going to be, my goal with this is to go very big. It won't be politics, there won't be things, there won't be ethics, there won't be things that are going to be offending people. It'll be a much more subtle approach in that sense. I'd like to sponsor a Super Chat match for a discussion on labor unions. What's the best way to contact you in regard to that subject? Yaron@yaronbrookshow.com. Yaron@yaronbrookshow.com. And since you mentioned that, there are a number of things you can do. You can sponsor a topic, $1,000, and I'll talk about the topic of your choosing. You can do a match, but then it becomes more of a telethon, and we also talk about the topic. That's also possible. And then you can have me do a movie review. That's $500, and I'll watch the movie of your choosing and do a review of it. How are states that produce energy like Wyoming, North Dakota, Montana, Texas, West Virginia? Governors of West Virginia said he'll fight green energy reform, yet Wyoming, gets more sun than most East Coast. We'll see. We'll see. I think there's going to be a lot of resistance to any kind of overt attacks on energy. I think what Biden is going to have to do in order to get it, think about it, the deciding vote in the Senate right now, what gives him 50 votes is Manchin, who's from West Virginia, who's not going to do anything to go against coal. So what he's going to have to do is he'll pass pro-alternative energy stuff, but he'll try to do it without penalizing fossil fuels too much. He'll posture a lot. He'll talk a lot. But in terms of actually doing, he won't do that much. I'm glad Governor of Wyoming is going to fight green energy, because even if you have a lot of sun, solar energy is not very efficient, even in very sunny places. It's still expensive. Did you say you were going to debate regular people with your audience as jury? Yes. I just haven't had time to do it. It's going to happen. I've got a couple of people lined up already to debate me. As soon as I have some breathing time to just focus on something, then I will do that. But I'm trying to juggle 3 different careers. As it is, my wife says, I start early in the morning and I end now here it's 10 p.m. So that's on a back burner right now, and hopefully by then, by early February, I'll start scheduling those. All right, thank you everybody. Have a great night. Time to go. Bye. See you Saturday. I think Thursday, Friday, no shows. Saturday and then Sunday we'll do 2 shows.